Bairos,
Yes.
wrestler, filmmaker.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming
My pleasure.
over and hanging out.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Got it.
And I'm very excited to have you be coaching at Hoover High School.
The Tornadoes.
The Tornadoes. Go Tornadoes.
Yeah. Looking forward to it. In process.
In process, yeah. You know, you have the documentary on Amazon Prime,
Yeah. Junkyard Dogs.
Junkyard Dogs. Great film on high school wrestling. Really educated me on how it works here in California, at least, you know. But just it was pretty cool that you started like in his freshman year and he went all the way to his senior year, and what a way he finished it. How would you have known that he was gonna?
I didn't. It started off as I was doing training videos for the kids, so I could play it back for them and teach them, instructional. And I would keep the camera on after they came off the mat, and they were so effusive and real. And I started watching this at night and thinking, my mind started clicking, and maybe we have something here. But I had no way of knowing what the journey was going to be like. It started off as kind of the school was the underdog. And then Kenji Porter stole the show. And he had quite a journey. But yeah, it was a 4-year process shooting it, and took about a year to edit it. I had like 400 hours of footage. So
That's a lot of love right there.
yeah.
A lot of passion.
Had a life of its own. But Kenji was great. He was a star. You know, it's great to have a good lead character.
Yeah, and one of the guys that I was sharing with you, the Sammy, who used to wrestle for you.
Sammy Lorenzana.
Yeah. He brought in Kenji, and I had met him years ago, so it was just like kind of full circle in a way, meeting you through Tarek and.
Yeah, that's wild. You reminded me of Kenji coming over there because he said I was going to try some jiu-jitsu because Sammy was so into it. And I remember that, but you reminded me. I didn't remember until you reminded me, so it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I was in Pasadena, but Sammy helped me start this school in Burbank.
Sammy did?
Yeah, he was my right-hand man. He did like everything.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He was on my team there for
Yeah.
3 or 4 years.
Hey, I always talked about you.
Yeah, he was a interesting guy. He really became into it, like maybe 2 or 3 years into the process. He liked wrestling, and it was fun. He had a lot of friends, but then it sort of clicked with him. And then I think he trained in jiu-jitsu for years after high school. He was telling me all about it.
Yeah.
Sammy's a good guy.
He had moved away, and now he's back to L.A.
Yeah.
So it's good to really catch up with him.
Does he come in here?
Once in a while, he's good friends with some of the guys that trained here for a long time.
And he's still heavily into jiu-jitsu?
He hasn't. I know he comes in once in a while and he trains because he's been so busy with. He's a project manager at a construction company, so I know he's busy with that. But he's trying to make it work with the schedule. It's long days and stuff like that.
He was really good friends with Kenji's older brother.
Right, that's what he was telling me.
So that's how I connected to all of them.
How did you start wrestling?
I'm from Northern California. I was fortunate enough to, when I was a kid, they had a really good wrestling club. And so I kind of had a couple of friends that were doing it. I was like 11 years old, tried it. Didn't hit me right away. I liked football and, baseball, things like that. But I just kept going. And I started competing, and it just became a part of my life. That biggest part of my life is a journey that I had no idea what I was on. But once I got on there, it was just like blinders. I was driven to do it every day, and so but yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a wrestling club in my town. We were
What town were you from?
Tracy. It was a small town in Northern California. Now it's grown.
Where's it? Where's that nearby?
It would be about 40 miles east of San Francisco.
Okay.
So San Joaquin Valley. And a lot of tough wrestlers around there. So the environment I was in, you know, there was a lot of kids wrestling at my age, so it was very competitive. And a lot of those kids went on and wrestled for D1 schools that I remember. So there was quite a little, you know, nucleus of wrestlers around that area that were very serious. So I got in that group and continued on. I was fortunate as a kid to get invited to a training camp in Portland, Oregon, where they had some really elite Olympians there. So I got to, you know, meet them and learn from them, and it sort of changed my life. I actually met my college coach there when I was 13. So,
Bobby Douglas,
yeah,
Arizona ASU.
Yeah, so, you know, if you start winning as a kid, you get more opportunities. So I got quite a few opportunities to go wrestle with very elite wrestlers as a kid. So it just opened my eyes.
What was it about meeting those guys in Portland that changed your perspective, or
they just had all the
changed you? They
were very. It was intense. It was we were probably guinea pigs because we were a group of 8, 12, and 13-year-olds, and they trained us all day. I'd never trained 8 hours a day, so we would have a session in the morning. It was a summer camp, training camp. We'd have a session in the morning. We'd go to lunch, have a session in the afternoon, have dinner, come back for a night session. So if you do that for 6 weeks, as a 13-year-old, it was, you know, a lot of kids didn't make it. So fortunately I did, and it changed my life, really. It taught me how to train.
It was 6 weeks?
6 weeks in the summer. It was a training camp for the Nationals. Yeah.
And you can go for 1 week, or you have to go for all 6 weeks?
You know, you were there for the 6 weeks because we were as a team training to win. So the kids that dropped off were the ones that just couldn't handle being away from home, too much work, whatever. But most of them stayed, 90%, and became some of my great friends. So it was life-changing to go to that training camp.
In Portland?
Yeah. Mark Sprague, that was their name. He was an awesome wrestler, and his father. Great coach.
What are the things that made people, or for yourself, like just, hey, what you chose, right? You want what you wanted to become. What made you stay?
I just loved the environment, learning. I was really bonded with a lot of the people. I think I must have known that I was getting better, and I was separating myself from the field. I felt that way. So once I realized that, hey, I'm getting better, and I'm now, you know, can consider myself among these guys, it just did a lot for my confidence. And when I came back home, I was a different wrestler, different athlete. So it's really about, I think, getting kids out there and showing them what it is. You know, sometimes you'll take a kid to a tournament and he may not be ready for it. He or she may not be ready for it, but the fact that they can see it and see that next level, it's huge. It's huge for a kid to see that. So, you know, wrestling is a sport that we all have some similar stories, you know, how it's changed us or had an effect on us. So, yeah, it was amazing.
6 weeks.
6 weeks training.
It was before high school?
Before high school.
Wow,
I was in seventh grade.
Wow.
So, you know, being away from home for the first time for a long time was something you dealt with. But we were just so busy working. And it really, I can't say enough about how it really left an indelible mark on me. And those lessons, and not all of them, they were painful, a lot of them. You know, I never had felt that physically tired in my life, never battled through that kind of adversity, but the result of it was I was a different person when I left there, different athlete.
8 hours a day for 6 weeks.
Yeah, it was
Monday through Friday?
Monday through Friday and Saturday morning session, and they'd give us Sunday off. It was, you know, get in and do it or get out. So there was nobody there to catch you, to say, hey, it's going to be okay. They set the bar, and the kids that got to it stayed. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
You have to bond with all the guys on the team.
Yeah.
Or you can't make it.
Yeah, and you see these, you're a young kid, and then when you get to college, start wrestling, you see, they're wrestling for other schools. So I would say a good 60 to 70% of those kids went on and had careers that were extended beyond high school. So they had the right guys there.
How was the CIF back in those days, the California High School Wrestling?
Well, the California State Meet is one of the newest ones in the country. They only actually had a state meet since 1977, which most states in the, in the country have had historic meets since the 40s, 50s, right? Well, ours only started in 77. They used to have a NorCal and a Southern Cal championships.
Okay.
And then that would end there. And they never really brought the two together until 1977. And since then, it's been one of the most, premier state meets in the country. It's the size of it,
Yeah, the amount of people.
There's every college coach is represented there in some way, as far as looking for kids.
What are the top states for high school wrestling?
I would put, Pennsylvania there, Ohio, New Jersey's very good, Michigan, Illinois, a lot of those Midwest and some East Coast, it's very tough in wrestling. And I'd put California on that list as far as certainly one of the top 5 tough state meets in the country.
Yeah, just about the amount of people, right?
Yeah.
I was looking at the list of high schools, and just in one section.
I mean, our section, Masters, we call it, is bigger than most state meets in the country. So if you make it through there, you're going to get eyes on you.
And how was how did you go to college or university? What was that?
I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to wrestle for Arizona State. Bobby Douglas was the Olympic team coach. He was a legend in the sport, and he was very hard to say no to. He came to my house and recruited me and called me at school. And he
called you at school?
Oh, yeah. I remember I was in a chemistry class, whatever, and they used to have those speakers on the wall where they'd say, Gary Bairos, come down to the principal's office. I'm like, oh, no. And then I'd pick up the phone, and he said, Bairos. And I said, yeah, who is this? This is Bobby Douglas. Are you a Sun Devil yet? It's like, oh, man, coach, what are you? So he was very difficult to say no to. Great coach.
Wow, he called you at school.
Yeah. He didn't give up easy. So he was known as one of the best recruiters in the country.
How did you? What was that process like? Did other universities? Did you go to some other universities? Did you visit ASU? Did you visit?
He wanted me to go to all the other schools that had offered. Go take all your trips. I went in 2 or 3, mostly the West. But go take all your trips, and when you're done, you come to ASU, and we'll talk about it. But don't sign anything. So I went on my trips, didn't sign anything, and saved ASU for last. And
that was it.
He was smart.
Who were some of the guys on the team back in those days?
We had just a pretty eclectic team. He was from Ohio, so he recruited a lot of kids out of Ohio because very tough wrestling state. He had local kids from Arizona, and he loved to recruit out of California. He had a fence around California. If you got out of California without Bobby Douglas, I don't know how you do it, but he got most of the really good kids in California, unless Iowa got him or somebody else like Dan Gable. But
you would tell me the Dan Gable story when you would go out to wrestle. He'd be staring you guys down.
You felt like you were wrestling Dan Gable. He's quite a coach. But Gable, very intense. You're wrestling him and their guy.
Could you tell that story again?
Well, okay, the
Some Dan Gable stories.
first college match I had was against Barry Davis. He was a defending NCAA champ, and I figured I'd won in high school a lot. I'm going to win this match too. So, but I remember, you read about, in those days, there obviously no internet, so you read about Iowa, so you see all these people, grow up watching them, reading about them. So I'm in this dual meet, and there they are, the cast, Dan Gable and his team. So I'm the first match up. I wrestle Barry Davis, and I remember warming up for the match. I'd look over, and Gable's staring me down, just looking at me, grinding his teeth. And it was pretty intimidating at the time, but you got the full Dan Gable experience. He was very intense. And, of course, I thought I was going to go out there and win that match, but I got a rude awakening of what college wrestling was like. I remember feeling I'd never felt that tired in a match. So I really had to get used to the pace of college wrestling, the strength level, because coming out of high school, it's a huge, even if California's a tough state, it's a huge leap to D1 wrestling in terms of strength, technique. So, but, being at ASU and with Bobby Douglas, I got a chance to wrestle all those big schools like Penn State, Michigan, Iowa State, because he had that kind of reach. So they'd come wrestle us, and we'd go wrestle them. So got to wrestle the best colleges in the country, which was great.
Wow. And then post college?
Post college, I had to make a choice whether I was going to keep wrestling or move on to something else. And I knew that if I stayed in Arizona, there's no way that I could stop wrestling. Because it was, all the guys were there, he was there. It would have just been very difficult. So I just completely left Tempe, Arizona, and moved to New York City. So there was no wrestling I could find in Manhattan. So I, put some distance between, and it was tough. When you wrestle for that many years of your life, and that's your identity.
Yeah.
So it was a very difficult transition into, my adult life. I remember watching the NCAAs on television a year later in New York and just feeling so emotional. It was tough. It took a while to transition out of wrestling. It's not like a lot of athletes, it's not easy to retire.
Yeah.
Especially if you're 22 years old.
Yeah.
You feel like you got more gas in the tank. But I had to do it, so I went there and I changed my life. Started writing and doing as much theater as I could do, just embedded myself in that world. And I was trying to find something that could match that kind of desire that I had to, be a good wrestler. So that's how I got away from wrestling.
How did your wrestling help you in this new career?
It's a good question. Wrestling, it's a little simpler. It helps. I think it helped me in many ways as far as just my focus. I was used to making myself living uncomfortable. You can be, that doesn't bother me to be a little bit uncomfortable. So I think wrestling's, it helped me just with my perseverance and sticking in there and not letting, disappointment stop me. So, because wrestling, you have to learn to lose in a way that can be productive as opposed to, self-destructive, which I had to learn also.
Yeah. And how did you find yourself back to wrestling?
I came back to LA, and I was I was running around the track over at in Studio City at this school, this private school, and I hadn't been on the mats in years, and I inquired that they had a little wrestling team over there. I thought I'd help out a little, and they did, and it just kind of had a life of its own where the team needed a coach, and I started off kind of a temporary situation and kind of I didn't put my full time into it. And then it kind of just snowballed into this thing where I had so many kids that wanted to train and wanted to get better. So I made time for it. And it's been great. Teaching kids wrestling helped heal a lot of my old wounds from wrestling. I got to see myself coaching a kid and it made me, it just healed a lot of emotional wounds. I started to have a little bit more, I just gave myself a break a little bit on everything that I felt that I didn't accomplish. But coaching really helped me heal my own self as an athlete. I saw what they were going through, how hard it is, the sacrifices they make, how painful losing is. So having come through the sport and gone through all that, it helped me be able to communicate with the kids in a healthier way. So they didn't make some of the same mistakes I did.
What were some of the mistakes that you made that?
I just was not a real good loser. Losing for me, I would be very self-destructive in a way that I just would not necessarily physically self-destructive, but I would just beat myself up mentally over losing, and I was too focused on the result, not the process. So I had to learn how to transition out of that thinking in order to be successful, because you can't win every match, you know. But yeah,
Focus on the process, not the result.
yeah. I try to tell kids that all the time, young athletes, that we all have our goals. We have to set our goals. But on Tuesday morning, we have to focus on the process, and it keeps you in line a bit, I feel. And even when it comes to competition, don't focus on the outcome of the match. Focus on the competition, what you're going to do in the moment right there, instead of the result of the match. So you're really in the process of the match as well. So it's just a little shift in your thinking that I think it helps to lift some of that pressure and get you moving, which is what you really want to do, is get moving. Nerves can make you freeze up.
Yeah. For your performance, improve.
Let go. Just let go.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we listened to the John Wooden. I made my daughter and the kids kind of listen to it too. The John Wooden book. What's it called? Success. Something like that.
Be quick, don't hurry.
But just all his sayings, right? Of a lifelong lifelong teaching, coaching lessons. Yeah. I guess they asked him a question, right, when he was in his, I think, after college, and he's like 25, and he's like 80 at this point. And he's like, what is success, right?
I mean, great coaches breed other coaches too. I'm sure Wooden has many, many coaches that have come out of his, teams, and the same with Bobby Douglas. Yeah, if you look at the top coach in the colleges right now, it's Cale Sanderson, Penn State, and that's Bobby's recruit out of Utah. So very, technically minded person. So it's not a surprise that Zeke Jones from Arizona State, they're some of the top coaches in the country, came from Bobby. So great coaches breed other great coaches.
Yeah. Just got me thinking about all kinds of the mistakes, right? That you could going back, learning how to lose better. That's a big one.
For me, it was huge. I remember we lived out in the orchards, so I was, very upset because I took a third place medal in a tournament. So I was out in the back throwing third place medals away. And my mother came out and said, "What on earth are you doing?" And I said, "I'm getting rid of all these seconds and thirds." And she looked at me like, maybe this is not the sport for you. And it just infuriated me, Yes, it is, So I had, you learn the hard way. deal with yourself, really. It's such an internal journey, vision, self. How do you talk to yourself is important. You know? How do we talk to ourselves after a loss? Wins are great. You know, we love our wins, right? But the hard part is getting that out of those losses, taking the good, leave the others behind, take the good out of it, and move on. It's an important lesson.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And then, so you coach at Harbor Westlake for like 15 years?
I coached there for about 15 years. You know that when I started the program, it's they weren't really.
Yeah, I just started it when you started filming.
They had a program, but they were in transition and they were thinking of getting rid of it, and so as I stepped in there, I think we had 6 guys on the team when we started. But we started the wrestling club, Junkyard Dogs Wrestling Club, in the off season. So that was huge for our team because I could get these kids to train, you know,
all year long.
Yeah, and because it's very hard to be seasonal at any sport now, but particularly wrestling because there's so much to learn, as you know. You can be a great athlete, but you've got to learn to wrestle. Being a great athlete will help you learn to wrestle, but until you learn, you know, how to do it, it's you got to get in there, and a couple years before you really kind of get some traction on what you're doing.
What were some of the things that you changed up that you had them do?
I think just trying to make wrestling, first of all, it was a very elite academic school, so I tried to make wrestling something that they wanted to show up. It wasn't going to be we know wrestling's a grind. I wanted them to want to come to practice. So I tried to create an environment where they could be themselves, no matter who you were, and they had a place to fail. And that was perfectly okay, as long as you were in there and you had, you know, your goal was to improve, you could fail. So I tried to create an environment where they were all having fun, and yet they didn't realize that they're really starting to work. And I think when they started to work and realize that you see your body changing, you're a kid, and you start to, your self-esteem comes up a little bit. I think that it sort of caught on like wildfire. So the few, I would say 10, 12 kids that were really the core of the Junkyard Dogs Wrestling Club, they were all in, you know, they loved to. So I tried to create an environment where they were having fun and we were working. And also that wrestling was cool. It wasn't the guys in the dark corners over there and nobody talks to them. We were a cool sport, and they felt like they were doing something that was cool. So I tried to create that environment and then keep the level very high. So
it's interesting for the just think for Hoover, you know, how to start the thing.
I don't think that model changes either. It's
right.
We're in California. Kids have a lot of things they can do. It's not snowing outside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we create an environment. They want to be there. They're getting better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've done that here. Look,
yeah.
You really create a family, a group of kids that want to all have the same mission: improve, get better, support each other. So.
Yeah, nice. Let's talk about women's wrestling.
Okay. You know, when I wrestled, there was no women wrestling. We at Arizona State University, if a woman would have walked in our room, it would have been weird. As you know, whose girlfriend is that, or what does she need? Is she from the administration? So I had really not much knowledge on women's wrestling, but my college teammates, Zeke Jones and Andy McNaughton, were they were a couple years behind me. So Andy had a sister named Trisha McNaughton, and she has her, you know, she grew up wrestling in a wrestling family, but there really was no opportunities for girls in those days. And she went through just, as a kid wrestler, she was beating all the boys and just, you know, catching all kinds of negativity. So, but anyway, I met up with these guys, and they were telling me about Trisha, and I knew of her peripherally, but I'd never met her. So I thought, oh, that would be an interesting story. Not necessarily because it was women's wrestling. What really got me on the story was she was such an underdog. And, you know, when somebody, for me, when somebody says you can't do something and the person sets out to do it, I'm all in. So I was really attracted to the story because of everything she had to go through just to wrestle. And then she ended up changing the landscape of sports, where she came out to ASU and had Bobby Douglas there and the Sunkist Kids Wrestling Organization, which supported her to some degree, and she just took off like wildfire. And there was no women's wrestling in this country. It was actually thriving in Japan and some other countries, France. But here even in Canada, we weren't into it at all here.
Why do you think it thrived in Japan?
I've asked that question a lot. I think that first of all, I think they saw an area where they could be successful. But they were a little more, they seemed to mix the men and the women more. The women had access to the best coaches in Japan. They had access to all of the athletes. They really mixed the practice, so the women got up to a higher level much faster than they would have if they were working out on their own. So why they were, I think I really don't have a good answer.
They're the ones that came out, right? They did really well at the Olympics, and
they've won the last. I think, women's wrestling in the World Championships started. I think the first one's 89.
89,
and they've won since then all of them but 2 or 3.
Wow!
So they're the most dominant wrestling team by far. The Americans have won 1, maybe 1 or 2, but the Japanese girls are really incredible. They just seem to be more accepting of women in that combat environment. I think we had a lot of politics in this country regarding women with wrestling, with Title IX. A lot of the wrestlers, I think, looked at the women as maybe a threat to the sport, because the result of Title IX, not the women's fault, was they were dropping men's wrestling programs around the country. So I think they may have gotten a bad rap on that from the wrestling world. So there was a lot of reluctance to include women, fully accept them into the wrestling world and fund them and, treat them like they should deserve to be treated. There was a lot of reluctance. It's tough. I don't know why exactly. I don't know exactly why but I think Title IX had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, and now, I mean, the high school, like you keep seeing the articles of women's or girls wrestling in high school. It's the biggest growth sport in high school.
Yeah, fastest growing sport in the country. Shocking, right? I never would have guessed that. But coaching women is, they're like sponges. They want to learn. They're eager to learn. So I think that's one of the reasons the sport's taken off like crazy is these women. They want to be in wrestling and they want to learn and they want to get their level up. So I don't think it's going away either. It's actually ends up being sort of the salvation to men's wrestling to some degree, because we were at threat of losing wrestling in the Olympics in 2016, and I think one of the only reasons we got the sport back in was because we had included women in 2004. But think about this: Trisha started down in Arizona in 1990. Even though she won 4 world championships, it took till 2004 before they really included it in the Olympic Games, and also till 2002 before we really sanctioned a women's wrestling team. So even though she was winning, and there were some other girls that were winning too, it took a long time to really get behind the women. And now I think it's just can't stop them now.
You think Ronda Rousey has helped the growth of women's wrestling?
I think that anytime you see a woman, and she's not trying to be a man, she's a woman.
Right.
In a combat sport like that, it can't help but, make people watch and see things from a different perspective. So absolutely. That's another point about the women's wrestling team in our country is they're not trying to be men. They're not walking around trying to copy the men, do whatever the men do. Maybe technically, but they have their own vibe, their own attitude towards wrestling. They've brought a lot of energy to the sport.
Yeah, I learned a lot just when I first started speaking to you about it. And you've been doing this whole documentary on women's wrestling, right?
Yeah, I started working on it probably when the pandemic started around there, right before.
The last 4 years, wow.
Yeah, so it took me that long to really collect all the interviews and really get the story. That's how I really got on the story. I mean, I kind of knew what the story would be, but I didn't know until the girls, I sat down and started talking to them and let them tell their story. So the narrative came out of all the interviews, and they were eager to talk. Some of these women are in their 50s now, and they call themselves the grandmothers of women's wrestling, and they're amazing. But yeah, there was a few Afsoon Rashan Zamir, Shannon Williams that were really the beginning and more. But Trisha was the one that stuck in there and really, she was a bit older than the other girls because a lot of these girls, they got them out of high school. They were like these lone girls on boys' teams, and they kind of formulated this qualifier to make a world team. But Trisha was a bit older. She'd graduated from the University of Wisconsin already, and so she was sort of the leader, den mother of the girls, and so she was able to really formulate a plan and speak their truth to try to get the sport. So she was really kind of the leader of that group.
Yeah, was it the women's? Just going to the CIF, and I mean, I've never been to an arena all girls, filled with girls, and every bracket had 32 girls in it. Sarani's been doing jiu-jitsu, and there's especially as you get higher in the belts and stuff, it's like less and less girls. But man, like 32. And it was we talked about it. It was so much fun. Just and then going all the way watching, like you told me before the season or during when I first started talking to you, like make sure she goes all the way and watches state at the end.
It's important to see it so she can light her fire and say, well, I can be here next year. I see it. They can visualize themselves being there. It's important. And the women in, California is one of the OG states for women's wrestling.
Okay.
They really were there. I don't know if they were first, but they are, really, the first women's qualifier was in San Francisco, California in like 1989. Lee Allen started up there in the Bay Area. And so California has kind of been a jumping off point for women's wrestling.
Yeah, they speak well, right? They communicate really well. Like, and also the girls, like you would think. I mean, back in the day, there weren't too many girls doing jiu-jitsu as well, right? And if they were like, they were more, more manly than girly, and but I mean, there was so many, and they're pretty. They're athletic. It's great. It was great. That level was really good at the state. All the girls, we stayed there the whole weekend. It was like, how many days is it?
3 days.
3 days. Yeah, 3 days. I'm gonna be there for 3 days. At the end, we're like, oh man. But yeah, it was so much fun. We saw some of our girls that used to train jiu-jitsu with us, and it was so powerful.
I think jiu-jitsu has been a great thing for wrestling for the women especially because a lot of these, even the boys, a lot of these young kids that I get in the wrestling club have a jiu-jitsu background. They started, maybe the parents look at it as something that's a little maybe safer for a young kid to start. I don't know how they view that, but I know that a lot of the kids that I've worked with have had started with jiu-jitsu. So it gave them a grappling sort of base to start with. So it's not so foreign to stand across from somebody and go at it. So yeah, it's helped bring a lot of the popularity of jiu-jitsu, the explosion of jiu-jitsu, if you
UFC, right? Too.
yeah, that for sure has really elevated both of the sports and gave them, their place, which is their importance.
Yeah.
In martial arts.
Harvard went so that 15 years ago. I mean, that was the UFC got kind of bigger, and when was it? 2007, 8, 9. It started to grow like a lot bigger.
Yeah, and well, they were there in the late '90s, but it was really kind of coming together.
Right.
Dan Severn was like one of the first ones. He was Arizona State Sun Devil. So, but so around, I think really started getting some traction like 2004-ish.
The Ultimate Fighter, right? The first season.
Yeah,
that was 2000. What was that? 2005, right?
When did they have that fight with those two guys?
Yeah, 2005, I think.
Changed everything.
Yeah, 2005.
It became, great.
Spike TV, they had it on Spike TV. Those were the days.
Early supporter.
Yeah, and then when it went to Fox, right? What was that? I don't know. I forget the years, but just exponentially kept growing.
Yeah. It's I watch it, like crazy. I'm a fan. But yeah, wrestling. Years ago, I'd get the question inevitably from somebody like, "Who would win in a fight between a boxer and a wrestler?" We'd always go, "Oh, the wrestler would win." So, but the UFC has sort of brought everything together, and really, if you don't know, if you're short on any of the disciplines, you're going to get exploited. So you have to know a little bit of everything. It's
yeah,
tough sport.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my God.
Got to get your jiu-jitsu, your wrestling, your striking.
Got to do it all.
Yeah.
If you want to win.
And you got to be great at one of the things, right?
Something that you're a little better than everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love the tactics about it. I think that's what intrigues me watching it, is like, these two different disciplines going at it, and which one's going to be able to employ their strategy. I find that fascinating.
Did you ever think about fighting?
I didn't really, because it wasn't on my mind then. Growing up, my dad put boxing gloves on us. He loved boxing, so I was always a fan of fighting. Sugar Ray Leonard, all those fighters. But hadn't really happened when I was doing that. Probably a good thing.
But you love the sport. You watch all the...
I was a huge boxing fan, watched every fight. So when the UFC started coming in, I was like, okay, I'll watch. I'm in. I'm all in.
So going back to the women's wrestling, what were some of the things, in this 4 years of you making the documentary, what were some of the things that stuck out to you?
Just what stuck out for me was I was trying to figure out why they were so reluctant to include women.
In U.S.?
In the U.S. And so I was trying to, find out what's the reason. And the only thing I could come up with, really, there's a lot of things, I guess, but we were reluctant to see our women in that kind of a combat sport for some reason. I don't know. It seemed like they were more readily accepted in a sport like judo, even, or karate or something. But when you get women wrestling, for some reason, I think the wrestling world also needs to evolve, and has to some degree. But they're very old school sport, and they're reluctant to make changes sometimes in the rules. So that was part of it, the mentality of wrestling. We don't like to change too much, I think, to our detriment. But just the story of her as a kid and what she went through, and their family intrigued me. They literally had to fend off adults that were, wanted to attack her, It's the worst adult.
Attack her because of...
She was a little 9-year-old girl beating the boys. And,
okay.
And the parents couldn't handle it, especially in the 70s. It was just unheard of.
What state was it?
It was in Michigan.
Michigan, okay.
And they just couldn't deal with it. And there was literally people coming up and wanting to attack the father. In that environment when, people are emotionally charged anyway. So, and then your son is getting beat by a girl. And, she was the kind of kid, too, also. She didn't just go out and beat you. This girl was phenomenal. She just destroyed little boys in front of their parents and didn't do it because she was some kind of a bully. She did it very matter of fact. She was just kind of
She's just wired that way.
yeah, exactly. Very competitive. And it was hard for people to accept that in those days. So I found that to be, first of all, shocking. But I was used to it because I'd grown up in wrestling around the same time as her. And I saw, when you got your little kid out there wrestling, you'd be amazed at what parents, the reactions come out of them that they'd never even expect. So it can be pretty, crazy environment. But she had to navigate all that, and the
roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
It's like, man, all over the place.
Yeah, and they were
during winning and losing, right?
Yeah, they were quite a family. Have a history. The father wrestled for University of Michigan. So they had the grandfather. They had a huge history in the sport. So that helped her being around great people in the sport. But she had to retire at 12. There was no.
Wow.
When she was done, she had 200 matches as a kid, and she had to retire at 12 because there was no women's sports in schools. So you can do it in the AAU and all the the international wrestling, things like that, but you cannot do it in a school sanctioned program. There's no women. So
I did a podcast with Rhonda's mom, and there was no really too many women right at the time, and the only reason why she thought that she could do it was the first teacher. She saw a woman in the class. Getting it wrong. Or she was a teacher. She's like, oh, I can do this too. Just seeing another female doing it, right?
Rhonda or the mother?
The mother.
Yeah, she was a really good at judo.
Yeah, she was a first American world champion.
So she saw another woman doing it, and that gave her the idea.
I think so, or she was the first coach. I'm not sure. I'm getting it wrong. It's been a minute, but she just because she saw another female doing it, she's like, I can do this too. It made her believe she can do it, right?
And she got her daughter in it.
Well, yeah, she tore everybody up, right? And then daughter.
I mean, she changed combat sports, right? You can't deny that.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, she put it on the map for UFC. Remember the Dana White
saying, "I'm never gonna have women in the UFC." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're here, and I mean, what year did Rhonda would she have started? Let me think.
She came in here. This is in 2011, 12, and I'd never seen a girl female be that good, because she was a judoka, but her ground was really good. Her mom was really, arm bars, and she was so good. And she was tapping all the purple belt, like tough, strong guys out.
Really?
Yeah. Just taking them out one by one.
Tough kid.
And I trained with her. I was like, oh my God, wow, she's different. Of course, she was a bronze medal Olympian, But yeah, she's still a female.
Right.
And she was legit. She was the real deal.
Yeah, she brought a lot of eyes to
and so then
combat sport.
Yeah, and then she got set up the right way, and the right things happened, and the rest is history, right?
Yeah. Yeah, women's wrestling is here to stay. I think it's going to end up being, like I said, the salvation of men's wrestling, because it's amazing how many programs have been taken out of California.
Wrestling programs?
Yeah, Division I programs. There used to be UCLA had a great program. Oregon's gone. Washington State are gone. So Title IX has just decimated California college wrestling. And that's because there probably should have been more terminology written in the law. They allowed universities to spend the money however they wanted. So they added women's sports, but they took away men's, and that really wasn't sort of what the law's intent was. Mm-hmm. But we didn't, we probably should have got out in front of that a little more as a organization, USA Wrestling, instead of fighting Title IX all those years and trying to abolish Title IX, which was never going to be abolished, it's a law, they probably could have tried to work within the law, and it would have saved a lot of programs.
Yeah.
But that's hindsight.
Yeah.
And now the damage is done.
Hopefully the women wrestling will bring everything back and more.
They're better at selling their sport. They seem to be. I hear some of these girls talk after the Olympics, like Adeline Gray, and I'm like, wow, she's on point, knows exactly what she should be saying, and so they're a little smarter about how they sell their sport, which is helping the men. But as Tricia always says, if not for a few good men, there wouldn't be any women's wrestling either. So it took men to bring women in. So rather than make men against women, it's, we're one wrestling community, really. Yeah. And I think we're starting to view it that way more and more.
The first female wrestler that I noticed, I guess, was Helen. And just seeing her, hearing her story. Yeah. What was it, 2012, the Rio Olympics?
Yes. Helen Maru, yeah. Is it 16? No.
Wait.
12.
12, yeah. 16. Beijing is
2008 was Beijing.
Okay.
2012 was London.
London.
And so 16 was Rio.
16 is Rio, yeah, so 16.
Yeah. Yeah. Helen's great. She's a great example of a girl who's been in the sport long enough to evolve, have great training, and that's what wrestling women that have been wrestling look like now. Very technical and fun to watch. Didn't start out that way, but they're evolving fast. I've seen the level of women's wrestling go up in the last 5 years. Geez.
Last 5 years, huh?
Last 5 years, I've seen a major difference in the technical level, everything.
I watched one of those Goldcast videos, those shorts, and they were talking about her and how she basically, she lost to the Japanese 3-time gold medal Olympian, and then she came back and she even learned Japanese so she could understand their coaches, and just kept going, kept pushing, and then met up with her and beat her in the Rio Olympics.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I don't think
the first American gold medal Olympian wrestling.
Yes, Helen's great. The Japanese girls, they had when Tricia was wrestling, they had a girl named Miyu Yamamoto, and she was a 17-year-old phenom from Japan who had, she ended up winning 3 world championships. So Tricia meets her in the world championships, gets beat by Miyu. Miyu moves to Tempe, lives with Tricia for a year, goes to high school for a couple of years in Arizona, and they have a training partner. So Tricia's got this training partner now.
Wow.
So, and she took her back to Japan, and took her to practices, and she said her eyes just opened up because she saw all these women training with men, and she was like, oh, that's why they're so good. They were getting top-level training from the best coach, and he was working with the girls specifically. Whereas in America at that time, they were lucky if they would give them a piece of the mat. You guys can train over there, and nobody paid much attention, right? So it was a huge difference in the kind of training we were getting. But Miyu and Tricia were very instrumental, and Miyu wanting to grow the sport over here as well. So Tricia, every time she'd have Miyu wrestle over here in America, so when guys would say, girls can't wrestle, watch her. So the Japanese are way ahead of us.
For high school teams, for example, because I know in Chicago or Illinois, a lot of the schools, they have like a boys and a girls wrestling team, right? And what are your thoughts on just how to do it the right way or the best way? It just depends on, I guess, what you have at the school, right?
Yeah.
The resources and things like that.
That's true. You mean as far as men and women training together?
Yeah, but and also just how to do it the best way.
I think that they have different competitions. I think that it's healthy for them to be training together to some degree, not necessarily with each other, but you also, like you said, resources. You don't have, so you have to train them in the same room, same time usually. But I think it's helpful to all of us be on the same page, technically. I think the women are going to have different needs than the men. Like, some men have different needs than other men as far as what they need as an athlete. But I also think it's important to nurture and cultivate more women's coaches. I think that'll be an important thing going forward for the women as some of these women stay in the sport and go back and, coach their teams or coach teams. But I think women, I'm not a huge fan of men wrestling women unless it's in a practice, we're drilling environment and we're learning. But unless they're very young and before maybe the boys reach puberty or something, yeah, absolutely, we can wrestle them all together. Once they hit that, they get that man strength, you don't want them wrestling each other. But training together, I think absolutely.
Because, it's the ego. Maybe the boy gets mad too, right?
Yeah, and it's just there's a strength difference, in a young man and then there is a girl. They can be the same weight, but the boy's a lot stronger. So it doesn't really work after 12, 13 to keep them competing together.
Yeah.
But training together, yes. I mean, obviously we have to sometimes too, but I think there's a lot of benefits to them training in the same room. Again, it starts with the coach, right? What kind of environment are you going to create? So, yeah, I think the women and the men can train together, not necessarily with each other, but in the same environment for sure. Have the same access to the same information. That's huge. If you're going to teach the men, you teach the women. And they may need a little different technical things to the women. Their bodies move different. They are much more flexible than a guy. A technique that might work on a man doesn't work on a woman. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can put a guy's leg in the air, and he's probably going to go down. You can put a woman's leg up to her head, and so there are some different feels. Wrestling a man or a woman.
A little bit different, some slight things.
Yeah.
Slight differences. You had mentioned before, like, going to the States and visualizing. How important is visualization?
It's so important. I know that when I was a kid and I went up to that camp I was speaking of earlier, they'd set us in a room and lay us down and turn the lights off and say, now envision yourself on the podium, the top. And I just couldn't figure out, why am I doing this? I just didn't. At that time,
in your that first camp you went
12
to,
years old, to visualize yourself on the podium. And I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I started to realize, if you can see it in your brain, it can happen. If you leave an imprint on your brain. So visualization is huge to success. Yeah, you've got to think it first before you can do it. Things don't happen by accident, most of these successful athletes have been dreaming about this moment specifically for many, many years. And so it's so important to teach kids to, have the vision of where do you want to go? What do you want to do with this? And then once they say, hey, that's what I want to do, great. Now we're going to work today on this, because it's the process, the journey to that. But it's important to have that. Where do you want to go with this?
Mm-hmm.
It's not random. We're working toward a goal.
What keeps you on the mat?
The kids, really. What you get back from them, which caught me completely by surprise. It doesn't even matter if they're a state champion. Sometimes I've had a kid that could hardly win matches, and then got to a point where he was winning maybe half of his matches, but I got as much joy out of watching him, get over that hurdle, if you will, as I did watching a kid place in the state. And I didn't expect that as a coach. I was going to try to, as wrestlers, we give back to our sport, and the kid wants to learn something, you teach them. But, when you start working with these kids on closely, you realize that, you're getting a lot back. It's hard to articulate all of it, but that's the most important thing is the relationships that I've formed, what it's done to myself, growth. But yeah, just what you get back from the kids is pretty amazing. Pretty amazing stuff. That's what keeps me going, because I like the energy I get back, and I see myself in the kid or something, you know. And as far as like they want to win so bad, and I feel like if I can be somebody that helps you, guides you, facilitates you, you know, reaching your dream, I'm all in. So if you're in, I'm in. So that's the way I feel. If I get a kid that has the desire, that's huge. You know, he doesn't have to be the best athlete necessarily, but if you've got the desire, you got something to work with.
You know, martial arts, jiu-jitsu, wrestling. Why do you think it's important in today's world for, yeah, well, why do you think it's important in today's world, especially?
I think that for a man, anytime you can sort of, I think that it teaches you what real toughness is and what being a man is. I'm speaking from a male perspective, obviously, but it teaches you to be okay with yourself. I think a lot as you're growing up as a kid, as a boy, you don't really, you know, are you my tough? What is a tough guy? You know, I think that martial arts, wrestling, a lot of these disciplines teach us what really is to be respected. So it changes your value system of what you respect.
Your value system.
It's not just you're not going to get away with being a bully in any of these rooms. So, and if you are, you'll probably get run out pretty quickly. But I think it really, and I think the same is true for women, to be honest with you. Their self-esteem, their self-worth. You know, at those ages, kids are a lot going on. You know, your teenage years, starting high school, a lot going on. You can go in a lot of different directions. Wrestling or any sport, but you know, these martial arts sports give you a path. And there's just a lot of self-esteem. I think Kenji in the documentary Junkyard Dog said, you know, people might view me as sort of a nerd. You know, I read anime. He was like 15 years old when he said, I read anime, but I'm also an athlete. So, you know, I didn't really fit in anywhere. He said, but wrestling gave me a place. So I think it's so important for us to, you learn a certain respect for each other. But again, your value system really changes as what is being tough and persevering. What is really the definition of that? So I think the sport puts that right in your face.
Right in your face. Character development.
Huge. I think everybody, honestly, I'm from the school of, I think that wrestling should be a mandatory sport in all schools for men and women, girls and boys. Doesn't mean you have to be a wrestler, but just getting in there and doing it, there's huge learning lessons in that. I think it should be mandatory. I really do.
I agree.
Especially
that'd be amazing.
Kids go home and get on your computer, or and kids love wrestling. They love grappling. You can go to a picnic and you have a bunch of kids and you can give them games and all this stuff. Pretty soon they're going to be on the ground. So I think it's in us. It's just innate in us. So
I agree. Well, thank you for all of your years of helping the community and helping kids, and I loved your documentary. It taught me so much about California wrestling, and it was just great to see that journey of Kenji in that movie. You know, from his freshman year to growing to senior year, and yeah, I mean, I told you I made all my kids watch it, and so that was just it was really great to share that moment with them watching. And yeah, my daughter couldn't believe that maybe you were available to maybe potentially be the coach for Hoover.
I mean, it's great. It's all seems to be working out.
Yeah. When we first talked, you know, you were still there, and yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to support Hoover Wrestling and support you and the kids.
Thank you. It should be a lot of fun
with my daughter and beyond.
She's great. She's gonna have fun. Make sure of it.
Yeah,
she's a good one.
Yeah. Thank you. How can people find you?
Well, we have Junkyard Dogs Wrestling, his Instagram page. And we also have a website, Junkyard Dog Wrestling. And so you can sign up there. And we're going to be starting our new location, hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks. And I'm excited to get started again.
Awesome. Can't wait. Why was it called Junkyard Dogs?
When I was a kid, I met these people in Montana, and they had a really good wrestling, and they were like really hard Scrabble people, and they had a couple of kids that were so tough, and the fathers named the wrestling club Junkyard Dogs Wrestling. I thought, wow, that's pretty good. And then
Tough.
being at Harvard Westlake, which is kind of an elite private school, they weren't so big on the name Junkyard Dogs Wrestling, but ended up being kind of a thing, and so that's how it came about.
Awesome. Congratulations. Thank
you
you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Looking forward, Coach.
Yeah. All right.